The sound of a body hitting the floor is louder than you think. In the hallowed silence of courtroom 4B, when Keisha finally collapsed, it sounded like a gavel striking a death sentence. Her husband, David, didn't gasp. He didn't rush to help the woman he'd been married to for 15 years. He just looked at his watch, and sitting right behind him, wearing a dress that cost more than most people's cars, his mistress Tiffany did the unthinkable. She smiled, a cold, victorious smirk. She thought the war was over. She thought she had won everything. She had no idea that the recording sitting in the evidence box was about to wake the dead. The air conditioning in the Oak Creek County Courthouse had been broken for 3 days, but the heat inside courtroom 4B had nothing to do with the ventilation. It was a suffocating, heavy atmosphere, thick with the smell of old wood polish, stale coffee, and the impending destruction of a life. Keisha Reynolds sat at the plaintiff's table, her back distinctively straight, though her hands were trembling beneath the mahogany surface. She wore a charcoal suit that had seen better days, a stark contrast to the shimmering designer silk worn by the woman sitting in the gallery, directly behind the defense table. Tiffany Blair, the mistress. Tiffany wasn't just a spectator. She was the catalyst. She sat with her legs crossed, a posture of relaxed arrogance, scrolling through her phone as if she were waiting for a manicure rather than a verdict on a 15-year marriage. On the other side of the aisle sat David Reynolds. Keisha looked at the back of his neck. It was freshly shaved. He was wearing the navy blue suit she had bought him for his promotion to regional director at the firm. A promotion he had gotten largely because Keisha had ghostwritten his speeches and organized his networking galas. Now, he was using that salary to pay a shark of a lawyer, a man named Roger Sterling, to ensure Keisha left this marriage with nothing but her maiden name and a mountain of debt. "Mrs. Reynolds," Judge Harold Stein's voice boomed from the bench. He was an older man, with bushy grey eyebrows and a reputation for zero tolerance for courtroom theatrics. He looked tired. "We have been over the financial disclosures 3 times. Your counsel claims there are hidden assets, yet you have provided no paper trail. Mr. Reynolds has provided bank statements, tax returns, and property deeds. Everything appears to be in order." Keisha's lawyer, a court-appointed attorney named Clifford Banks, looked nervous. He was young, overworked, and clearly outmatched by David's high-priced legal team. "Your Honor," Clifford stammered, shuffling papers that were already disorganized. "My client insists that the offshore accounts exist. We just need more time to subpoena the records from the shell company in the Caymans." "Objection." Roger Sterling stood up, buttoning his jacket with a smooth, practiced motion. "This is a stalling tactic, Your Honor. Mrs. Reynolds is struggling to accept the reality of the situation. My client, David, has been more than generous in his settlement offer. He is offering her the 2018 Honda Civic and a cash sum of $5,000. Considering she has not been employed for the last 5 years, this is charity." The word hung in the air. Charity. Keisha felt a sharp pain in her chest. Not employed. She had run the household. She had raised their twin sons who were currently at a boarding school. David insisted on sending them to, so they wouldn't see the mess of the divorce. She had renovated their investment properties with her own hands to save on contractors. "I worked," Keisha whispered. Her throat felt like it was filled with sand. "Speak up, Mrs. Reynolds," Judge Stein commanded, though not unkindly. Keisha stood up. Her legs felt like jelly. "I worked, Your Honor. I managed our rental units. I did the accounting for David's consulting firm from our home office. Unpaid domestic assistance is not formal employment. Mrs. Reynolds, David's lawyer, cut in smoothly. And as for the rental units, the deed is in David's name. You were merely helping your husband, as a wife does. David turned slightly. For the first time all morning, he locked eyes with Keisha. There was no love in his gaze. There wasn't even hate. There was just a cold, bored indifference. It was the look you give an old appliance you're waiting to have hauled away to the dump. Behind him, Tiffany covered her mouth to hide a giggle. The sound was like a needle pricking a balloon. "We are moving to closing arguments," Judge Stein said, rubbing his temples. "Unless the plaintiff has new concrete evidence to present today, I am inclined to rule on the division of assets based on the documentation currently in front of me." "Your Honor, please," Keisha said, her voice rising, cracking with desperation. "He emptied the joint accounts on a Friday night. He transferred the house to an LLC on a Saturday. By Monday, I was locked out. He has $3 million in assets, and he's claiming poverty." "Prove it," David mouthed. No sound came out, but Keisha saw his lips move. "Prove it." The room began to spin. The brown wood of the judge's bench blurred into the beige of the walls. The heat seemed to psych pressing down on the top of her head. Keisha gripped the table. She had proof. She knew she did. But where was it? The envelope. The digital recorder. She had given it to Clifford. Hadn't she? She looked at her young lawyer. Clifford was frantically searching his briefcase, sweat dripping onto his legal pad. I can't find the affidavit, Mrs. Reynolds," he whispered, panic in his eyes. "The one from the bank teller. It's not here." Keisha's heart hammered against her ribs. Thump, thump, thump. She looked at Tiffany. Tiffany held up her phone, pretending to check a message, but she angled the screen just enough for Keisha to see. It was a photo of Keisha's car parked outside the courthouse, and standing next to it, holding a briefcase that looked suspiciously like Clifford's spare, was a man in a black hoodie. They had stolen the evidence. They had gotten to Clifford, or they had robbed him before he walked in. The realization hit Keisha with the force of a physical blow. They had stripped her of everything. Her home, her children, her dignity, and now her voice. "Mrs. Reynolds," the judge asked. Keisha opened her mouth to speak, to scream, to accuse them of theft, but the air wouldn't enter her lungs. The room tilted violently to the left. The lights above flickered. Darkness rushed in from the edges of her vision. The collapse wasn't theatrical. It was heavy, ugly, and sudden. One moment, Keisha was standing, her knuckles white as she gripped the table. The next, her knees simply ceased to exist. She crumpled straight down her head, striking the edge of the defendant's table on the way to the floor with a sickening thud. "Keisha!" Clifford yelled, dropping his papers. The courtroom erupted into a flurry of restrained chaos. The bailiff, a large man named Officer Miller, rushed over from his post by the wall. "Call a medic," Judge Stein shouted, standing up so abruptly his chair rolled back and hit the wall. "Order everyone stay back." On the floor, the world was a haze of grey carpet and throbbing pain. Keisha was conscious, but barely. She couldn't move her limbs. It felt as if a heavy stone had been placed on her chest. She could hear voices, but they sounded like they were coming from underwater. "Is she breathing?" "That was the bailiff." "She's faking it," said a sharp, nasally voice. "David's lawyer. She knows she's losing, Your Honor. This is a ploy for a mistrial." "Step back, counsel, or I will hold you in contempt," Judge Stein roared. Through her eyelashes, Keisha could see a slice of the courtroom from her vantage point on the floor. She saw the scuffed shoes of the bailiff. She saw the terrified face of Clifford. And then she saw the expensive Italian loafers of her husband. David hadn't moved. He was still sitting in his chair. He hadn't even stood up to look over the table. "David," Keisha tried to whisper, but it came out as a groan. "She's fine," David said calmly, loud enough for the court stenographer to type it. "She has a history of dramatic spells when she doesn't get her way. It's distinctively manipulative." Then the sound of heels clicking on the floorboards. Click, click, click. Tiffany had walked up from the gallery. She wasn't supposed to approach the bench or the tables, but in the confusion she had slipped through. She stopped right beside David. She leaned down ostensibly to look at Keisha, but her hand rested possessively on David's shoulder. Keisha, lying helpless, looked up. Tiffany wasn't looking at the judge. She wasn't looking at the bailiff. She was looking directly down into Keisha's half-open eyes. And then she smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It wasn't a nervous smile. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated predation. It was the smile of a woman who had successfully hunted her prey and was now watching it bleed out. She mouthed 2 words clear as day. "Bye-bye." The audacity of it was galvanizing. The sheer cruelty. The medic burst through the double doors at the back of the courtroom, carrying a heavy orange bag. "Make a whole move." As the paramedics swarmed around Keisha, checking her vitals and shining a light into her eyes, the fog in Keisha's brain began to clear. It was replaced by something else. A cold, hard clarify. For months, Keisha had played by the rules. She had trusted the system. She had trusted her husband's conscience. She had trusted that the truth would naturally rise to the top like cream. She had been wrong. Lying on that dirty carpet, listening to David joke quietly with his lawyer while she was being loaded onto a stretcher, Keisha Reynolds realized that the innocent woman she used to be had just died on the floor of courtroom 4B. "Her BP is spiking," the medic said. "We need to transport her. Stress-induced hypertensive crisis." "I'm okay," Keisha rasped, trying to sit up. The medic pushed her back down gently. "You're not okay, ma'am. You took a nasty hit to the head." "David," Judge Stein said, his voice dripping with disgust. "You may want to accompany your wife to the hospital." David stood up, checking his cufflinks. "I would, Your Honor. But as I mentioned, we have that deposition for the custody hearing at 2:00 p.m. And frankly, if I go, she'll just keep the drama going. It's better if I let the professionals handle her." The courtroom went silent. Even the stenographer paused. The coldness was absolute. "Very well," Judge Stein said, his eyes narrowing. "Court is recessed until 9:00 a.m. tomorrow morning. And Mr. Reynolds—" "Yes, Your Honor." "I suggest you pray that she recovers. Because if I find out this stress was manufactured by undue pressure or hidden assets, the division of property will be the least of your worries." David just smiled that charming corporate smile. "I have nothing to hide, Judge." As they wheeled Keisha out, she saw Tiffany hand David a bottle of water. They touched hands. A brief, intimate brush of fingers that screamed victory, but they had made a mistake. A fatal one. In the commotion when Keisha had fallen, her purse had spilled open. The contents were scattered under the plaintiff's table. Lipstick tissues, a wallet. Clifford, in his panic, was scooping them up. But there was one item Clifford missed. A small black USB drive that had rolled out of a hidden lining in her purse. It had rolled across the floor, coming to a stop directly under the heavy oak chair of the court clerk. David didn't see it. Tiffany didn't see it. Clifford didn't see it. But as the gurney passed the clerk's desk, Keisha saw it. It wasn't the evidence of the bank accounts. That was what was in the stolen briefcase. This was something else. This was the nuclear option. The one thing Keisha had promised herself she would never use because it would destroy not just David, but his entire family's reputation. God help them, Keisha thought as the doors swung shut, cutting off the view of Tiffany's smirk. God help them because I won't. The sterile smell of antiseptic was the first thing to hit her, then the rhythmic beep, beep, beep of a monitor. Keisha Reynolds opened her eyes. The harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital room stung, forcing her to squint. Her head throbbed with a dull, persistent ache, a reminder of the courtroom floor meeting her skull. "You're awake," a soft voice said. Keisha turned her head. Sitting in the uncomfortable plastic chair in the corner wasn't her husband. It wasn't her children. It was Clifford Banks, her young court-appointed attorney. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. His tie was loosened, and he was holding a cup of vending machine coffee with both hands. "Clifford," she croaked. "What time is it?" "It's 8:00 p.m., Clifford said, standing up and coming to the bedside. "You've been out for about 6 hours. The doctors said it was a combination of severe dehydration stress and a mild concussion. They want to keep you for observation." Keisha tried to sit up, but the room spun. She flopped back onto the pillow. "I can't stay." "The trial. Tomorrow morning at 9:00. "I can ask for a continuance," Clifford said, though he didn't sound confident. "Judge Stein saw you collapse. He's tough, but he's not a monster. He'll give us a few days." "No," Keisha said firmly, closing her eyes. "If we delay, David wins. He's betting on me being too weak to fight. He thinks I'm going to fold." Just then the door to the room swung open. The heavy wood hit the stopper with a loud thud. David walked in. He was still wearing his pristine navy suit, though he had removed the jacket, carrying it over his shoulder like a GQ model. He didn't look concerned. He looked annoyed, as if visiting his wife in the hospital was a tedious errand he had to check off his list before heading to dinner. "Clifford," David said, nodding at the lawyer. "Give us a minute, would you?" Clifford stiffened. "I don't think that's a good idea, Mr. Reynolds. My client is in a fragile state." David laughed, a short, barking sound. "She's my wife, Banks, not your client. Not yet. Now get out before I call security and tell them you're harassing a patient." Clifford looked at Keisha. She gave him a tiny nod. "It's okay." Clifford grabbed his briefcase. "I'll be right outside, Keisha, right outside." As the door clicked shut, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. David walked over to the bed. He didn't sit. He stood over her, looming, maximizing his height advantage. "You really staged a show today," David said, shaking his head. "Passing out? Really? It's a bit cliché, even for you." "I didn't fake it," Keisha whispered. "It doesn't matter," David said, reaching into his inner pocket. He pulled out a folded document. "Look, Keisha, I'm tired. You're tired. Tiffany is anxious to move on. This whole charade is embarrassing for everyone, especially you." He tossed the document onto the bedsheets. It landed on her legs. "What is this? It's a new settlement agreement," David said casually, inspecting his fingernails. "I bumped up the cash offer. $10,000. And I'll pay for your medical bills from today. But you sign it. Now we notarize it with the nurse as a witness, and tomorrow we go into court and tell Judge Stein we've settled. It's over." Keisha looked at the paper. $10,000 for 15 years of her life, for the business she helped build, for the home she designed. "And the boys?" she asked. David sighed. "They stay in boarding school. I retain full custody. You can visit them. I don't know, once a month, supervised. I don't want you poisoning them with your bitterness." Something inside Keisha snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was the quiet click of a lock falling into place. For years she had made excuses for him. He's stressed. He's ambitious. He's just working hard for us. But looking at him now, seeing the emptiness in his eyes, she realized there was no us. There never had been. There was only David and the people he used to climb higher. "You really think you've won?" Keisha said, her voice gaining a surprising amount of strength. David leaned down, his face inches from hers. He smelled of expensive cologne and Tiffany's perfume, a cloying vanilla scent. "I have won, Keisha. I have the money. I have the lawyers. I have the house. And you have a hospital gown and a court-appointed lawyer who looks like he buys his suits at a thrift store. Sign the paper. Don't make me destroy you completely." Keisha looked at the pen he was holding out. She reached for it. David smiled, the same victorious smirk Tiffany had worn in the courtroom. Keisha took the pen. Then she looked David dead in the eye. "Go to hell." She threw the pen at his chest. It bounced off his silk tie and clattered to the floor. David's face turned a shade of red she had rarely seen. His nostrils flared. "You stupid, stubborn woman. You want to play fine. Tomorrow I'm not just taking the assets. I'm going to sue you for legal fees. I'm going to make sure you're buried in debt so deep you'll be working at a diner until you're 80 just to pay the interest." He snatched the paper off the bed. "Don't say I didn't try to be merciful." He turned and stormed out. As the door closed, Keisha let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear, from rage. Pure, refined rage. Clifford rushed back in a moment later. "What happened? Did he hurt you?" "I need to leave," Keisha said, swinging her legs over the side of the bed. The room spun again, but she gritted her teeth and forced the world to stop moving. "I need my clothes, Clifford." "Keisha, you can't. The doctors—" "I don't care about the doctors," she snapped, then softened. "Clifford, listen to me. When I passed out, something fell out of my purse." Clifford looked confused. "I picked up your things, the lipstick, the wallet." "No," Keisha said, gripping his arm. "There was a USB drive, a small black one. It was in the lining. Did you see it?" Clifford's face went pale. "No, I didn't see a drive." Keisha closed her eyes. The clerk's desk. She remembered seeing it roll. It had stopped right under the heavy oak chair of the court clerk. "It's still there," she whispered. "It's on the floor of the courtroom." "Okay," Clifford said. "We'll get it tomorrow morning before the session starts." "We can't wait," Keisha said, standing up. Her knees were weak, but she locked them. "If the cleaning crew comes in tonight, if they vacuum, it's gone. And if that drive is gone, I lose. David wins everything." "What's on the drive, Keisha?" Clifford asked, his voice hushed. Keisha looked at him. "David thinks he's smart. He thinks he hid his tracks. But he forgot that for 5 years, I handled the IT for his home office. I set up the cloud backups. And I set up the voice-activated dictation software he uses to brainstorm his schemes." She grabbed her coat from the chair. "That drive contains an audio diary. He likes to record his thoughts when he's drunk. He talks about everything, Clifford. The offshore accounts, the bribes to the zoning board for his development projects, and what he really thinks of Judge Stein. Clifford's eyes widened. He talks about the judge. He mocks him, Keisha said grimly. He calls him a senile old bat and details exactly how he plans to lie to his face. Clifford let out a low whistle. If Stein hears that. Exactly, Keisha said. But we have to get it. Tonight. The Oak Creek County Courthouse at night was a different beast than during the day. By day it was a hive of bureaucracy, echoing with footsteps and legal arguments. By night it was a silent, imposing fortress of stone and shadow. Keisha and Clifford sat in Clifford's beat-up sedan, parked across the street. It was 11:30 p.m. Rain had started to fall, blurring the streetlights. "This is crazy," Clifford said, gripping the steering wheel. "We're lawyers. Well, I am. We're not cat burglars. We can't just break in." "We're not breaking in," Keisha said, staring at the side entrance. "We're going to ask politely." "Ask who the ghosts?" "Officer Miller," Keisha said. "The bailiff. He works the night security shift on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I overheard him talking about it last week." "And why would he let us in?" "Because," Keisha said, reaching for the door handle. "He has a wife and 3 daughters, and he saw what happened today. He saw Tiffany smirk." She stepped out into the rain. The cool water felt good on her feverish skin. She walked across the street, Clifford scrambling to catch up, holding his briefcase over his head like a makeshift umbrella. They reached the side staff entrance. Keisha pressed the intercom button. Buzz. "Security, state your business," a distorted voice crackled. "Officer Miller, it's Keisha Reynolds." Silence. Long, heavy silence. "Mrs. Reynolds." The voice came back, surprised. "You're supposed to be in the hospital." "I was, but I left. I left something in courtroom 4B, officer. Something, life or death." "Court opens at 8:00 a.m., ma'am. Come back then." "I can't," Keisha said, leaning into the speaker. "Please, Officer Miller. You saw them today. You saw how they treated me. If I don't get this item tonight, it might be gone by morning. I'm just asking for 5 minutes. Please." There was a pause that felt like an eternity. Clifford shifted nervously beside her. "He's not going to do it, Keisha." Then a loud click echoed from the door. The heavy metal latch disengaged. Keisha pushed the door open. Officer Miller was standing at the security desk, a half-eaten sandwich in his hand. He looked tired. He looked at Keisha's hospital bracelet, which was still on her wrist, and then at her determined face. 5 minutes, Miller grunted. "I don't see you. You were never here. If anyone asks, I was in the bathroom." "Thank you," Keisha breathed. "Thank you so much." "Don't make me regret it," he said, turning his back to them. Keisha and Clifford ran down the hallway. Their footsteps echoed loudly on the marble floors. They passed the portraits of past judges, their eyes seeming to follow them. They reached the double doors of courtroom 4B. It was locked. "Damn it!" Clifford hissed. Keisha tried the handle. Locked tight. She looked around. "Miller said 5 minutes. He didn't unlock the specific room." She looked at the transom window above the door. Too high. She looked at Clifford. "Do you have a credit card?" "This isn't the movies, Keisha. These are government deadbolts." Keisha leaned her forehead against the wood. She was so close. "Wait," Clifford said. He knelt down. "The cleaning crew." "What? Look." He pointed to the bottom of the door. There was a small rubber door wedge, kicked off to the side, but the door wasn't wedged. However, there was a faint light coming from under the crack. "Someone is inside," Keisha whispered. "The janitor," Clifford said. Keisha knocked. Softly at first, then harder. The door opened inward. A startled woman with headphones around her neck and a mop in her hand stared at them. She looked terrified. "We're not here to hurt you," Keisha said quickly, raising her hands. "I'm the lady from the trial today. The one who fell." The janitor's eyes widened. She recognized her. "The fainting lady? Yes, that's me. I dropped something. Can we just look?" The janitor hesitated, then stepped back. "I'm waxing the floors in 10 minutes. Make it fast." Keisha rushed in. The courtroom was dark, lit only by the ambient streetlights filtering through the high windows. It looked ghostly. The tables were bare. She ran to the plaintiff's table. She dropped to her hands and knees. "Do you see it?" Clifford asked, scanning the room nervously. "No," Keisha said, panic rising in her throat. She crawled toward the center aisle. She reached the clerk's desk. It was a massive, old-fashioned wooden structure. She lay flat on her stomach, ignoring the pain in her ribs, and peered into the darkness beneath the desk. Dust bunnies, a gum wrapper, a paperclip. No drive. "It's not here," she choked out. Tears pricked her eyes. "It's gone." "Maybe it rolled further," Clifford said, pulling out his phone and turning on the flashlight. He swept the beam across the carpet. Light danced over the patterned rug. Nothing. "Someone took it," Keisha said, sitting back on her heels. "David, he must have seen it, or Tiffany." "If they have it, we're dead," Clifford said, his voice trembling. "Wait," the janitor said. She was standing by the door, watching them. "You looking for a little black stick, like for a computer?" Keisha's head snapped up. Yes, did you see it?" The janitor reached into the pocket of her blue uniform. "I swept it up about 20 minutes ago. I was going to put it in the lost and found box tomorrow." She held it out. There in her calloused palm sat the small black USB drive. To anyone else it was $5 of plastic. To Keisha it was a sword. Keisha rushed over and grabbed it, clutching it to her chest. She could have kissed the woman. "You have no idea what you just did. You just saved my life. Just don't faint on my clean floor again." The janitor grinned. Keisha turned to Clifford. He was leaning against the railing, exhaling a massive sigh of relief. "We have it," Keisha said. Her eyes were hard now. The fear was gone. "Now we need to prepare." "Prepare what?" Clifford asked. "We hand it to the judge." "No," Keisha said. "We don't just hand it to him. David's lawyer will object. He'll say it's inadmissible. He'll say it's doctored. We need to play it. We need the court to hear it before they can stop it." "That's highly irregular," Clifford warned. "Judge Stein will hold me in contempt." "Let him," Keisha said. "Once he hears what David says about him, he won't care about procedure. Clifford, are you with me? This is your chance to make a name for yourself. The lawyer who took down David Reynolds." Clifford looked at the drive, then at Keisha. He straightened his tie. A spark of confidence appeared in his eyes. "I'll bring my laptop," he said, "and a Bluetooth speaker." The next morning, the sun rose bright and unforgiving over Oak Creek. By 8:45 a.m., courtroom 4B was packed. Word had spread about the incident the previous day, and the local legal vultures were circling, hoping for more drama. David Reynolds sat at the defense table looking rested and confident. He was joking with Roger Sterling. Tiffany was back in the gallery wearing a red dress this time, a bold, aggressive color. She looked like she was attending a premiere. "Do you think she'll show?" Tiffany whispered loudly enough for the front row to hear. "Doubt it," David chuckled. "She's probably still sedated." "All rise," Officer Miller bellowed. Judge Stein walked in, looking even grumpier than the day before. He sat down and arranged his robes. "Docket number 44, B. Reynolds versus Reynolds. Resume session," Stein grumbled. He looked at the empty seat next to Clifford. "Mr. Banks, I see your client is absent. I assume she is still hospitalized. Do we need to reschedule?" Roger Sterling stood up immediately. "Your Honor, while we sympathize with Mrs. Reynolds's condition, my client has a business to run. We cannot keep dragging this out. If the plaintiff cannot appear, we move for a default judgment based on the current evidence." Judge Stein pursed his lips. "Mr. Banks?" Clifford stood up. He didn't look nervous today. He looked focused. "My client is not absent, Your Honor." The double doors at the back of the courtroom opened. Keisha walked in. She wasn't wearing the grey suit from yesterday. She was wearing a white dress she had bought years ago for an anniversary dinner David never showed up for. She walked slowly, slightly limping, but her head was held high. She looked spectral yet unbreakable. The murmur in the courtroom died down. David turned around. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second, then returned. "Look at the Lazarus Act," he muttered to Roger. Keisha walked through the gate and took her seat. She didn't look at David. She didn't look at Tiffany. She looked straight at the judge. "I apologize for the delay." "Your Honor," Keisha said, her voice clear. "I checked myself out against medical advice because there is evidence that this court needs to hear. Evidence that was overlooked." "Your Honor," Roger Sterling barked, "we are past the discovery phase. No new evidence can be submitted." "It pertains to the credibility of the financial disclosures, Your Honor," Clifford said smoothly, "and to the integrity of this court." Judge Stein raised an eyebrow. "Integrity of the court? Explain." "We have a recording," Clifford said, "of the defendant admitting to the concealment of assets." "Objection, hearsay, illegal wiretap," Roger was shouting now. "It's not a wiretap," Keisha said calmly. "It's a dictation diary recorded on a shared family device, which I had administrative access to. There was no expectation of privacy on a shared server." David's face went white. He knew about the dictation software. He just never thought she knew how to access the cloud backups. "I'll allow it," Judge Stein said, leaning forward. "But be warned, Mr. Banks, if this is a waste of my time—" "It won't be," Clifford said. He pulled his laptop out. He didn't hand the drive to the clerk. He plugged it in. He turned the volume up to maximum on the portable speaker he had hidden under the table. "Mr. Banks, submit that to the—" Roger started. Clifford hit the spacebar. The voice of David Reynolds boomed through the quiet courtroom. It was slurred, arrogant, and unmistakable. "Entry 44, October 12th. God, what a day. Had to move the last chunk of cash to the shell in Belize. 3 million. Poof. Gone." Gasps erupted from the gallery. David froze. Tiffany stopped chewing her gum. The recording continued. "Keisha is clueless. She thinks we're broke. Pathetic. She'll take the $5 grand and be grateful. And as for the judge, Stein—" Judge Stein's eyes narrowed into slits. David's voice laughed on the recording. "Stein is a joke. A senile old bat who couldn't find his gavel if it was up his arse. I bought his golf club membership last year, through the firm, indirectly, of course. He'll sign whatever Roger puts in front of him. He's too tired to read. I own this town." Silence. Absolute, terrified silence. Roger Sterling slowly closed his eyes and sat down, distancing himself physically from David. On the recording, a woman's voice giggled. Tiffany's voice. "You're so bad, baby." "I'm not bad," David's voice replied. I'm just a winner, and winners take everything. Clifford stopped the playback. Keisha turned to look at her husband. David was gripping the table so hard the wood might splinter. His face was a mask of horror. He looked at the judge. Judge Stein was not shouting. He was not banging his gavel. He was staring at David with a stillness that was far more terrifying than any yell. His face was a stony mask of fury. Mr. Reynolds, Judge Stein said, his voice dropping an octave. Did you just say you own me? David stood up, knocking his chair over. Your Honor, that's AI. That's a deep fake. She made it up. It's metadata stamped, Your Honor, Clifford said. Time and date verified. Judge Stein stood up. He looked 10 feet tall. Bailiff, the judge said. Lock the doors. Officer Miller moved to the doors, crossing his arms. He looked at Keisha and gave her a nearly invisible wink. Mr. Reynolds, Judge Stein said, picking up a piece of paper, David's financial affidavit, and ripping it slowly in half. It appears we need to have a very long, very serious conversation about perjury. And fraud. And contempt of court. He looked at Tiffany in the gallery. And you, Miss Blair. Sit down. If you attempt to leave, you will be arrested as an accessory. Tiffany slumped into her seat, the blood draining from her face. Keisha leaned back in her chair. The pain in her head was gone. She watched the color drain from David's face, and for the first time in 2 years, she smiled. It wasn't a smirk. It was the smile of justice. The silence that followed the recording was heavier than the one that had preceded Keisha's collapse. It was the silence of a bomb having detonated, with everyone waiting for the shock wave to hit. Judge Stein remained standing. He looked down at the shredded remains of David's financial affidavit on his bench. His face was a terrifying shade of purple. Mr. Banks, Judge Stein said, his voice deceptively quiet. Please unplug that device and hand it directly to the bailiff. That drive is now Exhibit A in what I imagine will be a very lengthy criminal proceeding. Roger David's high-priced attorney was already packing his briefcase. His movements were jerky and frantic. Roger, do something, David hissed, sweat beading on his forehead. Object. Tell him it's out of context. Roger stopped. He looked at David with a mixture of pity and revulsion. He then turned to the bench. Your Honor, in light of the evidence presented, which implies my client has utilized my services to unknowingly commit fraud upon this court, I am moving to withdraw as counsel immediately. Denied, Judge Stein snapped. You are the attorney of record, Mr. Cross. You will sit there and witness the mess you helped create until I say otherwise. Sit down. Roger sat looking like a deflated balloon. David looked around wildly. His gaze landed on Keisha. She was sitting perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. She wasn't smiling anymore. She was just watching him like a scientist observing a specimen under a microscope. You set me up, David shouted, pointing a shaking finger at her. You planned this. You baited me. Mr. Reynolds! Judge Stein roared, slamming his gavel so hard the wooden puck cracked. Another word and you will be gagged. Do you understand me? David clamped his mouth shut, his chest heaving. Officer Miller, the judge commanded, take Mr. Reynolds into custody immediately. The charge is direct criminal contempt to start. I am also referring this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation into perjury, fraud, and embezzlement. Officer Miller moved with a speed that belied his size. He unclipped the handcuffs from his belt. The metallic snick of the mechanism was loud in the room. David Reynolds, put your hands behind your back, Miller said, a grim satisfaction in his voice. You can't arrest me, David stammered as Miller spun him around. I'm a partner at Reynolds and Finch. I have a deposition at 2 o'clock. You're going to miss it, Miller grunted, cinching the cuffs tight. As David was being manhandled, Tiffany stood up in the gallery. She grabbed her designer purse, her eyes darting toward the exit sign. She looked like a trapped animal. I didn't do anything, she squeaked. I didn't know. Ms. Blair, Judge Stein said, his eyes shifting to her. On the recording you were heard laughing about the concealment of assets. That makes you a conspirator. Tiffany's face crumbled. The mask of the arrogant mistress dissolved, revealing a terrified, selfish child. She looked at David, who was now being held by the arm by Officer Miller. He told me it was legal, Tiffany screamed, her voice shrill and piercing. He told me Keisha signed a prenup. He said the money in Belize was his bonus. David's eyes bulged. Tiffany, shut up. No, I won't shut up, Tiffany yelled, stepping into the aisle. She pointed an accusatory finger at David. He's the one who hid the laptops. He has a safe in the condo on 4th Street. The combination is 88 to 2140. That's where he keeps the cash. The courtroom gasped. Even Clifford Keisha's lawyer looked stunned. Keisha watched the scene unfold with a cold sense of inevitability. This was the nature of relationships built on greed and deception. The moment the pressure applied, they turned on each other like starving rats. There was no loyalty among thieves. A safe on 4th Street. Judge Stein wrote something down. Thank you for that information, Ms. Blair. It will be very useful for the search warrant. I'm cooperating. Tiffany cried, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. I'm a victim here. He manipulated me too. We'll let the police decide that, Judge Stein said dismissively. Officer, detain Ms. Blair as well. She is a flight risk. A second bailiff stepped forward. Tiffany screamed as she was led away, kicking and sobbing, dragged past the very woman she had smirked at only 24 hours earlier. Keisha didn't look away. She met Tiffany's eyes as she passed. Tiffany looked at Keisha, pleading silently for mercy. Keisha simply raised an eyebrow. The message was clear. You wanted his life. You got it. As the door closed behind the screaming mistress and the handcuffed husband, a heavy silence returned to the room. Judge Stein exhaled a long breath. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked at Keisha. Mrs. Reynolds, he said, his voice much softer now. I owe you an apology. The court system relies on honesty, and when one party decides to make a mockery of it, victims like you suffer. I am freezing all assets associated with Mr. Reynolds, including the firm's operating accounts, the shell company's total, and the personal accounts of Ms. Blair, pending investigation. He leaned forward. You are granted immediate temporary sole custody of your children. I am also granting you exclusive use of the marital residence and the investment properties. Mr. Banks, draw up the order. I will sign it today. Thank you, Your Honor, Clifford said, beaming. Keisha stood up. Her legs were steady now. Thank you, Judge Stein. She turned and walked out of the courtroom. The gallery was full of whispers, people pointing and staring, but Keisha didn't hear them. She walked through the double doors past the security checkpoint and out into the bright morning sun. She took a deep breath of fresh air. It smelled like rain and asphalt, but to Keisha it smelled like freedom. But she wasn't done. The recording was just the key. Now she had to open the door and clean out the rot. 3 weeks later, the Reynolds house felt different. The blinds were finally open, and sunlight flooded the dining room, where Keisha sat across from Walter Finch. Walter wasn't just a forensic accountant. He was the Finch in David's firm, a man David had always called incompetent. It turned out Walter was just observant. "He was stealing from everyone, Keisha," Walter said, sliding a spreadsheet across the mahogany table. "I found a shell company called Red Hook. He was using firm capital to pay for an apartment in the city, $4,000 a month." Keisha stared at the numbers. While she had been clipping coupons to buy school uniforms for the twins, David had been spending a fortune housing Tiffany in luxury. "And the Belize account?" Keisha asked. "Found it, thanks to that audio diary." Walter grinned, adjusting his glasses. $3.2 million. Judge Stein froze it this morning. Under the hidden asset statutes, because he acted with malice, the court is likely to award the entire sum to you as a penalty. Walter hesitated, then pulled a manila envelope from his briefcase. "We also cracked his office safe. We found this." It was a private investigator's report. David had spent thousands trying to dig up dirt on Keisha to deny her alimony. Keisha flipped through the photos, her at the grocery store, her gardening, her picking up the boys. The investigator's summary was bolded at the bottom. Subject's life is routine. Devoted mother. No vices found. "He paid to prove I was a good woman," Keisha whispered, a dry laugh escaping her lips. The doorbell rang, cutting through the moment. Keisha checked the security feed. It was Tiffany. She looked nothing like the arrogant woman from the courtroom. Her designer dress was replaced by a stained hoodie, her hair a mess. Keisha opened the door, but kept the security screen locked. "Keisha, please," Tiffany sobbed, pressing her hands against the mesh. "They seized my car. They locked me out of the apartment. I have nowhere to go." "You have parents, don't you?" Keisha asked coldly. "They won't talk to me. I need a lawyer." "Just $5,000, Keisha. Please, I'm pregnant." Keisha looked at Tiffany's flat stomach, then at her desperate lying eyes. It was the ultimate manipulation, the last card in a deck of lies. "If you are," Keisha said, "I hope the prison has a nursery. You aren't getting a dime." She slammed the heavy door and threw the deadbolt. Click. "Trash taken out?" Walter asked from the table. "Permanently," Keisha replied. Just then the landline on the wall began to ring. The caller ID read, "County Jail." Keisha picked it up. "Keisha." David's voice was tinny and frantic. "You have to drop the charges. Tell the judge it was a mistake. I can fix this baby. I can fix us." Keisha leaned against the wall, looking at the yellow tulips on the counter. "There is no us, David. There never was. You're firing your partners, remember? Well, I'm quitting. You can't do this to me. I made you." "No," Keisha said, her voice steady. "You didn't make me. You just held me back." She hung up the phone and yanked the cord out of the wall. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of peace. Keisha Reynolds was finally free. 1 year later, the air in courtroom 4B was no longer stifling. The AC had been fixed, and the windows were open, letting in the crisp autumn breeze. Keisha sat in the front row, not at the plaintiff's table, but in the gallery. She wasn't alone. Her twin sons sat on either side of her, looking sharp in blazers she had bought them without worrying about the price tag. David Reynolds shuffled in. He was unrecognizable. The bespoke suits were gone, replaced by an ill-fitting orange jumpsuit. His hair was thinning, and his posture was slumped. He didn't look at the gallery. He didn't look at Keisha. He stared at his feet, defeated. Judge Stein looked down from the bench. He didn't look tired anymore. He looked like a man about to take out the trash. "Mr. Reynolds," Stein began, his voice echoing with authority. "Over the last 12 months, the forensic audit has revealed a web of deceit that is frankly staggering. You didn't just hide money from your wife. You defrauded your partners, you evaded taxes, and you attempted to subvert the judicial process of this county." David's public defender he could no longer afford. Roger Sterling stayed silent. There was nothing to say. "For the count of grand larceny, I sentence you to 8 years. For the count of fraud, 5 years. And for the count of criminal contempt—" Stein paused, locking eyes with David. "2 years, consecutive. You will not be eligible for parole for at least a decade." David flinched as the gavel came down. Bang! It was the sound of a heavy book closing. As the bailiff led David away, he paused. He finally looked up at Keisha. There was no anger left in his eyes, only a profound regret. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to ask for forgiveness, but Keisha simply turned her head. She looked at her sons, touched their shoulders, and guided them out of the room. Outside on the courthouse steps, the sun was blindingly bright. Keisha spotted a woman walking down the sidewalk across the street. It was Tiffany. She was pushing a stroller, looking exhausted, wearing a waitress uniform from the local diner. She looked up, saw Keisha standing in the sun, and quickly looked away, hurrying down the street. Keisha took a deep breath. She had her home. She had her business. She had taken over the consulting firm's honest clients and rebranded it. And most importantly, she had her self-respect. She didn't need to smile like a predator. She didn't need to smirk. She just needed to live. "Come on, boys," Keisha said, putting on her sunglasses. "Let's go get some ice cream. Mom's treating." And that is how Keisha Reynolds turned her tragedy into a triumph. She went from passing out on a dirty floor to standing tall as the owner of her own destiny. It's a brutal reminder that when you dig a grave for someone else, you better dig two, because you might just fall in yourself. David and Tiffany thought they were untouchable, but they forgot the most important rule of life. The truth always has a backup copy. If you enjoyed this story of hard karma and ultimate justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that the good guys do win in the end. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.